So, Travis, these last two sections of the show are going to focus more on specifics, right? Like just really diving into more the type of the granular look at this football team. And so we're going to talk about the areas where Notre Dame has to play at a high level and areas where they need to show improvement if this defense is going to be a key to a championship run. And when it starts, it really starts with the areas where they have to continue to thrive. And I think the pass game, efficiency in the pass game is huge for the defense, which equals for them creating inefficiency on offenses. That is a big thing. And you want to know why Notre Dame is a really good third down defense? Because they force a lot of incompletions, which means they're making a lot of stops on third down, but also when teams are completing less than 50% of their passes, all those first and second down throws that are going incomplete, well, guess what? That means they're going to be in a lot more third and long type of situations, and that's a place obviously where Notre Dame needs to be and be really good at. So this team has been very good at forcing teams to throw a lot of incomplete passes. And most of the teams that rank pretty high in this area are teams that are really good on third down. If you look at the top 5 teams in the country when it comes to top 5 teams in lowest completion percentage allowed, Notre Dame, Utah, and Northern Illinois are all also in the top 10 in third down defense. Notre Dame is 7th, Utah's 3rd, Northern Illinois is 2nd. Notre Dame is number 1 in pass efficiency defense or opponent combined quarterback rating. And when you look at some of the teams they might play in the postseason, beginning with Indiana, the more you can force incompletions, the better chance you have at stopping them and getting them off the field. That's going to be a big, big part of this for Notre Dame. Is this has been a strength of you all season long. You need to continue to make sure it remains a strength for you going into the postseason. And it's not a surprise that Curtis Rourke's 2 lowest completion percentage games of the year came against Michigan and Ohio State, which also happened to be games where Indiana had their least effectiveness on offense. They scored 15 points in both games. They scored at least 31 points in every other game in the season. And so create a lot of incompletions, a lot of tipped balls, a lot of incompletions, a lot of pressure, a lot of those things. Then the Indiana the offense won't be able to be as effective. Georgia's a similar situation. Penn State's going to be that way. SMU's going to be that way. Not a lot of teams are good in third and long. And that's been a huge part of Notre Dame's success, and that has to continue in the postseason.
Yeah, absolutely. They have a really active secondary. And you brought it up a little earlier. It just always feels like, with a lot of Xavier Watts's and Don Schuler's interceptions, it's not like they're matched up one-on-one in coverage and they're just, they're going up one-on-one with a tight end and they come down with the ball, right? I'm not saying they don't have that ability. It's a testament to those are 2 guys that do their job. They're in the right spot when they have to be. And the rest of the secondary is very active. They're also where they have to be. You brought up that interception against Louisville, right? That was pretty tight coverage that Ben Morrison had on an under route that he was kind of struggling to cover earlier in the season. Like receivers kind of got a quicker first step on him than he did. But Xavier Watts was right behind him. Ben Morrison was blanketed in coverage. It results in an interception, right? Keep creating those inefficiencies throughout the entire secondary. That also includes linebackers in coverage, right? In my opinion. So, yeah, I think that if they're able to stay as active as they have been this season and continue to do that, teams are not going to have a lot of success passing on Notre Dame. And I'm not saying that to be hyperbolic. That's just there's 12 sample sizes of teams not really having that much success outside of USC. Louisville had their moments, but it wasn't a super clean game for Tyler Shuck and Ja'Cory Brooks. And there's a lot of different factors. I mean, at one point, look, the way that I look at it is Notre Dame had 2 games where their secondary was kind of little iffy, some question marks. Louisville, where Christian Gray was ruled out 2 hours before kickoff. Ben Morrison went to the locker room, and at one point, Jordan Clark was playing field corner. And the other one was against USC, where the team was just visibly dog-tired. I don't want to be that fan. I don't want to be that guy that's, in the 2 games that they played bad, there's actually really good reasons as to why. It's not that they were just not as good. Right. But I do believe that it's not because they were just not as good. There were extenuating factors that kind of led into it. And they still won both of those games. So, But yes, pass game inefficiency's got to be huge. I knew Notre Dame was up there in forcing incompletion. I did not know they were forcing teams to be below 50%. That is
only team in college football.
That
and the next closest, Trevor, was at 52.4. That's Utah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah, pretty good. Pretty good.
That's decent.
Couple other things that need to be the areas where they need to thrive, Trevor, is the best version of the run defense we've seen for a chunk of this year needs to be there. And I felt like that was a part of the defense that got a lot better in the second half of the year. There were some times where it's like, they're not bad, but they're not good. I feel like the second half of the year, they were a lot better in the run game. I think the only exception that I would say that I really was kind of annoyed was probably the Florida State game. They allowed a few gash runs to happen that just kind of bothered me. They bottled everybody else up really the second half of the year when it came to the run game. They shut down Stanford. They shut down Virginia's run game. I thought they were a very good, a really good rush defense in the second half of the season, really keeping teams in check. Virginia had 128 yards. They got some of that on scrambles and late in the game. And then obviously USC was able to run the ball effectively, but a big chunk of USC's rushing yards came on that last drive where they ripped off like back-to-back long 20-yard runs when Notre Dame was basically just giving them yards, which kind of pissed me off. I'll be honest with you that they gave that up. But it just kind of it influenced the stats a little bit. But the point is there has been a little bit of this from the run defense where it's not consistent. You're going to need the best version of that, not for some, big picture, view of, championships are won by stopping the run. It's not even that, Trevor. It's just looking at their path. If you can't stop the run, you're going to have a hard time beating Indiana. You're definitely going to have a hard time beating Georgia. You're definitely going to even have a tougher time beating Boise State or SMU or Penn State. And good luck beating Oregon or Ohio State or Tennessee if you can't, or Arizona State if you can't stop the run. It's more practical than it is, a coaching principle of you have to stop the run. Because, look, if the playoff was made up of a bunch of teams that threw the ball all over the place, a bunch of Louisvilles and a bunch of air raid teams and a bunch, I'd say, look, just don't get killed on the run. But you got to really be on that. You look at the teams that Notre Dame's going to have to play; they're going to have to be really good against the run. And so you're going to need the best version of your run defense to be there this season or in this postseason if you're going to be able to make this run. It doesn't have to be elite, shut down. It doesn't have to be like Georgia Tech. Every game doesn't have to be like Georgia Tech, but it has to be good. It has to at least be good. Like they were elite against Georgia Tech. It has to at least be good every week. And then if you get a couple games where it's even better than that, great. Like if you have to play Boise State in the semis and Ashton Genty goes for 120 yards, I don't care as long as he does it on 35 carries. You just can't let him get there on 18. You know what I mean? That's when you get gashed. And so those are the things you look at, and we're going to need to see the best version of that part of this defense in the postseason.
Yeah, I think that goes into playing a balanced defense. Like we said, Al Golden does a really good job of taking away what offenses want to do successfully, but now it's not going to be as easy. That formula is not going to be as simple as it was in the postseason. It's not going to be as simple as, guys, we have to stop Jamal Haynes because they have a backup quarterback that's starting. And if he throws for 200 yards, he throws for 200 yards. But I don't believe that's what's going to be enough to beat us. But then you go through and you look at the makeup of some of these playoff teams. Actually, I mean, really all of the playoff teams, honestly. And it's not going to be as simple, maybe Arizona State, but it's not going to be as simple as, hey, if we shut down this facet of their offense, they're not going to be able to do much. So it's all encompassing. It's being able to stop the run when you have to and being the best version of yourselves this season that we have seen you play as. But it's also, hey, we also need the best version of the secondary. I mean, SEC championship game was a prime example. I mean, even when Carson Beck was in the game, I think he went into halftime with 54 passing yards. But then at the end of the day, they resorted to the run. And everybody knew that it was coming because they had a backup quarterback in and they still couldn't stop it. So it's going to come Texas being. So it's going to come down to, can you play a balanced defense? And some of that is, hey, dude, Al Golden, you're going to have to get your guys ready. You're not going to be able to just allow 160 yards on the ground, but you shut down their passing game. These teams are put together a little bit better than that. So, yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. But yes, best version of the run defense is going to be critical because I think with the players that you're going against, that 120 to 140-ish number, like that'd be on par. You know what I mean? Like if like it's not going to be like in the regular season where you look at, dude, how did Florida State get 140 rushing yards on you? And it's a little bit of a different lens where it's like, yo, you held Ashton Genty to 130, to your point, off of 38 carries, whatever that is. So as long as they're able to perform and do what they need to and be the best version of themselves, it's going to set them up for success.
We talked about the red zone D earlier. That's got to improve. That's got to be what it was most of the year, not what it was in November. The final thing is an area where this team really needs to thrive is Notre Dame has been a bit inconsistent at times rushing the quarterback, but have been a surprisingly good pass rushing team overall. And we brought up earlier the concern that we have about the edge rush, right? But overall, Notre Dame's been a pretty decent team at getting sacks this season. But even more importantly, in getting sacks, they rank 13th in the country in sacks per game against FBS opponents. The reason I put that in there is because you're just not going to get a lot of sacks against two teams that combine to throw the ball 18 times, Army and Navy, when you're playing those triple option teams. And so when you take that out and you just go sacks per game, not total sacks, because then that can skew it because all the non-FBS teams or non-Power 5 teams are going to be out of there. But when you look at it, Notre Dame ranked 13th in pressures this season, and only Boise, SMU, Texas, and Oregon are the only playoff teams to be ahead of them in sacks per game. They're at 3.13, so Ohio State is behind them. Indiana is at, Indiana is at 32nd. Tennessee is tied with them for 32nd. Clemson is at 29th. Georgia's at 29th. Ohio State is at 25th. So they're in the top half of the bracket when it comes to pressures. And even though they don't register super high volume of sacks, they have been a pretty disruptive defense this season in different ways. Whether it's safety pressure, we've seen Notre Dame bring a lot of pressures from the safety level. Whether it's the linebackers getting a ton of pressures, they haven't blitzed the linebackers nearly as much this year as they did last year. If you look at the numbers, Drake Bowen and Jack Kaiser have combined for 110 blitz, basically pass rushes this year. If you look at last year, for example, J.D. Bertrand had 104 by himself. Maris Leofau had 129 by himself. So they haven't blitzed their linebackers nearly as much this season as they did last season. And a lot of the pressures that they are getting from the linebacker level are coming from Jalen Sneed, who has 66 pressures, but that's mostly in third down, lining up on the edge of the defense type thing. So they haven't been as voluminous when it comes to pressures. But if you look at Jaden Ausberry, he's credited with, according to Pro Football Focus, 32 pass rushes on the season. He has 10 pressures on those 32 pass rushes. So if you gave him the same number of snaps that Maris Leofau had last year, he'd have over 40 pressures at that rate. He has 5 hits plus sacks on the quarterback, Trevor, which is a really good number to have for a linebacker who only blitzed 34 times. Drake Bowen has blitzed 46 times. He has 5 sacks plus hits on the quarterback. And so, when you look at like last year, for example, and I talked about this, how J.D. Bertrand was a pretty disruptive player last year. J.D. Bertrand on 104 snaps last year had 11 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. So if you look at, so he had 104 pressures. I'm just going to do this real quick math. Drake Bowen had 5 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. He played 46 pass rush snaps. If he played 104 snaps like J.D. Bertrand did last year, he'd have 11 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. So he's getting to the quarterback at the same exact rate J.D. Bertrand did last year. He's just doing it on a lot less snaps. If you look at the combination of the two Wills, which is Jaden Ausberry and Jack Kaiser. Jack Kaiser hasn't been quite as productive as he was last year on a per snap basis, but he's still been pretty good. But if you look at those two together, they have 12 pressures. Jack has 12 pressures. Jaden Ausberry has 10 pressures. So that's 22 pressures on the season. And they have had a combined 96 total pass rushes. So if you do that for the number of snaps that Maris Leofau had last year, they'd have an average of they'd have a total of 30 pressures on that per snap basis. Well, how many pressures did Maris Leofau have last year? He had 25. So the actual success rate of getting to the quarterback is identical to slightly better than it was last year when they had a pretty good pass rushing linebacking core. The difference is they're just not asking them to do that this year as much. A big reason for that is I do think overall they're getting better pressure from the front at times. And also, I think there's a much greater faith from Al Golden that they can cover. So they don't need to pressure quite as much as they did last season. So when you look at the overall pressure numbers this season, Trevor, they're not where they were last season from any sort of individual standpoint outside of Riley Mills, who this season has 33 pressures and 12 hits on the quarterback in 12 games. Last year, Riley had 32 pressures and 12 hits on the quarterback in 13 games. So he's already matched his numbers from last year despite playing one fewer game. Howard Cross has kind of come along, but there's just last year they had 267 pressures in 13 games. This year they had 209. But this year in those situations, Trevor, they still have 81 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. Last year they had 92. So they're not that far off, and they still have a game to play. And if you remember last year, they had a lot of those hits on the quarterback were in the Oregon State game against the Ducks last year. So the success rate has been similar, even though the volume isn't there. But I think in some of the bigger games, we've seen the pass rush really step up when it matters most. That has to be true in the postseason. Has to be. And getting Howard Cross back to form would be a nice part of that. But you're going to need, like you said, you're going to need your edge rushers to provide a little bit. You're going to need Donovan Heinrich to continue to do that. And I have a feeling we might see the linebackers kind of ramp up their cover, their pressures a little bit more this year. But also you brought up somebody yesterday. Bryce Young only finished with 14 pressures this season, and he only had 5 sacks plus hits on the quarterback. It should be pointed out that 8 of his 14 pressures came in the last 4 games. He only played 17 snaps against Army. So if you take that out, the last 3 games against Power 5 teams, he's had 8 pressures, 3 hits on the quarterback, and a sack in his last 3 games against Power 5 teams. So you're starting to see that success getting to the quarterback starting to get there, which made your prediction the other day, yesterday, of a potential breakout player that could have a big impact. That would be one that we could potentially see, and that would obviously have a huge impact. But this is an area where they have to thrive, and I think the numbers show that they're capable of it. But it's something that they're going to have to do this season, Trev. In the postseason.
Yeah, man. I mean, the stats that you just rattled off for the linebackers, to me, that speaks to efficiency. And they might not be doing it in the volume, but they're still reaching it at the same pace. I do think it's a testament to the coverage downfield, and I think that this is a better coverage linebacker unit than it was last year. I do believe that they're longer, they're faster, they're a little bit taller, they're more rangy. So you're not going to use them like you used a 6'1" JD Bertrand, So I think that's a factor as well. But I agree. I mean, it's getting pressure on the quarterback is going to be number one, especially situationally. Al Golden is one of the very few defensive coordinators in all of college football that's not afraid to send the house on 3rd down, because he knows that you can trust your coverage on the back end. And if you get home on some of these quarterbacks, maybe not even get home and complete the sack, but if you get a pressure on, you get a hand in somebody's face, it's going to be favorable for your guys. It's just most likely going to get a football just kind of thrown up in their direction. So, yeah, pressure is going to be huge. I said it yesterday that there's a direct correlation with the number of sacks that Curtis Rourke takes in a game and the amount of times he turns the ball over. Direct correlation. So speaking of that specifically with the IU matchup, I know we're kind of talking big picture here. So then you go look at the Georgia game. Well, you're going to have a guy in Gunnar Stockton potentially start, and that's going to be his first career start in college football in the quarterfinals of the first 12-team playoff, right? Pressuring that guy is going to be huge. Drew Aller has shown his biggest knock is being able to handle pressure.
Mm-hmm.
That's been his biggest knock since he's gotten into college, and then you go and look, Dylan Gabriel's been fantastic this year. And if there's going to be one way that you're going to try to disrupt them, I would look at my odds and my chances of, what does Notre Dame have a better chance of? Shutting down Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart? Maybe. But I don't think you can bank on that as hard as you can getting into the face of a 5'11" quarterback. You know what I mean? So pressuring the quarterback for next Friday and onward, if Notre Dame is to make a run, is going to be massive. Massive.
It should also be noted in these pressure numbers that last year Notre Dame's cornerbacks and safeties, not the nickel, but the cornerbacks and safeties, last year had 7 pressures on the quarterback. This year their safeties and cornerbacks have had 16. So that also adds to it's coming in a different way, but they're still getting pressure on the quarterback, and they have to be at their best in some of these games, no doubt about it. And so a couple aspects, Trev, where they need to improve. We talked about one already. You've got to find ways to get pressure off the edge, because if you can't rush with 4 in some of these better opponents, you're going to get in trouble. If you have to blitz Dylan Gabriel all game, let's say you get to the title game, if you have to blitz him all game to get to him, he's going to make some big plays. You'll get to him at times, but he's also going to beat you because he's got dynamic pass catchers to throw to. And it just takes one mistake with that group, as Penn State showed. It takes one mistake against those guys to result in the big play or a touchdown. So the edge pressure is going to have to be a big part of it. Another aspect too, Trev, because we did talk about that a little bit already. But as good as this secondary has been, they have been prone to big plays in the pass game. And it's a very interesting statistic, Trev, because when you look at Notre Dame's rankings this season, they rank 3rd in passing yards allowed. They rank 2nd in yards allowed per attempt, 3rd in touchdowns allowed. They're top 10 in total interceptions. They're number 1 in passer rating. But then they rank 46th in yards allowed per completion. Now, some of that is a tad skewed by you've given up a couple big plays against backups, but that's not enough to where you go from 20th to 46th. Right, so if you take away the big play at against Purdue, for example, that came against your backups where Kennedy Urlacher took out 2 DBs on the play, that doesn't change the statistic that much. And so that's an area that you look as could be a little concerning as you look to some of these matchups against teams like Indiana in round 1, potentially SMU, potentially Georgia, potentially Oregon. You think of that and you're like, boy, you gotta. You say, well, that you had the busted play against Northern Illinois and you had, the Louisville guy, but those things happened. You did have that busted play. You can't say, well, if you don't have that busted play, because you did have that busted play. You did give up a couple deep balls to Louisville, right? Okay, yeah, but they required good throws. Well, quarterbacks in the postseason are going to have receivers and quarterbacks in the postseason are going to be good enough to do those things. So get a little bit better jam at the line. Have a little bit better position, where maybe you're a little bit more hip to hip with a guy, those type of things. So you got to figure those things out. And, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I mean, I think some of it is just a byproduct of how disruptive and how aggressive this secondary plays. I do. And so far this season, it hasn't been a detriment. You know what I'm saying? Like you play aggressive, and like sometimes you get that notion that when you're an aggressive football player, you kind of get that Marcus Peters, Trayvon Diggs reputation, right? You'll make some big plays, but you also give a lot up. Notre Dame has avoided that so far this year. They've avoided hey, they got a guy that can go for a pick 6. They also have a guy that might give up 6 routinely. So it hasn't been too much of a detriment, but I like that you put it where the defense must improve. I would kind of file this under it's where the defense has to be a little bit more cautious than what they were potentially in the regular season as well, because you're giving up big plays, but I also don't want them to sacrifice what made them so good and be like aggressive. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like that's kind of how I look at it.
I don't mind them being aggressive. What I mind is when you're not disciplined with what's behind it.
Sure.
And there's been a couple times you're like, okay, you're bringing the house here. Why are you playing press coverage against a guy that's really good at the line? Or why are you playing off coverage against a team that wants to throw quick slants in front of it? Like it's been stuff like that, like that got a little bit frustrating. It's like, why aren't you taking the inside away? Because this team loves to throw glants and slants against pressure. Those type of things. Like it can be a little bit frustrating at times with that. It's cleaning up. So, and sometimes it's like you were supposed to take the inside away, but you didn't. And they just got to clean some of that stuff up. But that comes when they're at their best, they're mixing things up. You think Christian Gray's playing off coverage, so you bang an outside hitch throw or you bang an outside slant throw, but little do you know that he's driving on your route because he knows you're going to do that. And that's how he's had almost 3 pick sixes this year, is because you think he's playing off coverage. So let me just quickly hit the slant route on him.
Totally.
And then boom, next thing you know, he's actually not playing off coverage. He's just playing, well, he's not playing bail. He's playing off, but he's not playing bail. He's playing off so he can drive on any quick throws. And that's allowed him to have a lot of the production that he's had this season. So the big thing is going to be the best way to prevent this from being an issue is you have to play disciplined football, right? That's obviously a big thing. But the other one is a lot of things we talked about before. If you start getting them in pass-heavy situations, then you're going to increase your chances of not giving those up because on 3rd and 10, you're better prepared to defend against those things than you are on 2nd and 2 and 3rd and 2 and things along those lines. And that's where they're going to have. That's why that's so important. So discipline on the back end is going to be huge against the teams that they play in the postseason.
Absolutely.
And they're going to have to be better there. So, and then the final piece, Trevor, is a big one. This defense has been surprisingly prone to giving up long drives at the beginning of games or scoring drives at the beginning of games. And what's ironic is you and I have been critical of this. We actually looked at, and for the last 5 games, Notre Dame has only allowed 1 field goal in the first quarter. But I do think they've still been vulnerable. They've been able to step up and make some plays. And so like you look at the USC game, USC goes right down the field. They get into Notre Dame territory. Notre Dame has to make a 4th down play to really kind of be in a situation where they could, make a stop on 4th down and get off the field without giving up points. But they still were kind of vulnerable to letting them move the ball a little bit. And that's something that they're going to have to improve, in my opinion, Trevor. I mean, we saw it at times. They've been really good. I mean, Army, they were great. I think they forced Army out 3 and out on their first 2 drives before allowing a touchdown in the second quarter. And then, they were up 14-0 at that point in time. And then after that touchdown, they then finished the hat. So they had 2 3 and outs and then touchdown drive and then 3 and out, fumble recovery. I mean, that's the kind of dominance that you want coming out of the gate. And you need to see more of that and less of what we've seen at other times where they've allowed teams to kind of move the ball a little bit. Virginia was a perfect example of, you force a 3 and out. They go on like a little nice 35-yard drive where they kind of get the ball near midfield. And, you're kind of thinking, okay, you're letting them move a little bit. But then what do? You turn them over on downs. I'm fine with that. And then the next drive, 3 and out. The next drive, 6 plays, 22 yards punt. Next play, 3 and out. Next play, forced fumble. Next play, 3 and out. Next drive, interception. Next drive, interception. Next side. Look, if your offense plays the way it has most of the year and you do all those things, you're going to have a lot more than 28 points at halftime, even if you're playing in the playoff game. Right? So they had a 28-0 halftime lead against Virginia and didn't even play that well in offensively because the defense did that. But then there's the Florida State game where they let Florida State kind of go right down the field and get into scoring position. Navy kind of shot themselves in the foot. Navy had converted at least 1 first down before they had 6 plays, 24 yards. It was 1st and 10 when they fumbled that ball. So they had already converted a 3rd down and in position where they had ran on 2nd down and 7, got a 1st down. They were kind of putting a drive together before they fumbled. And that's something. Their second fumble was near midfield. So they've been a little bit vulnerable in the first quarter to giving up some ground. I'm okay if that happens in the playoff as long as it doesn't result in points, especially touchdowns. That's the big thing. You're not going to just come out and completely shut Indiana down. I mean, heck, Ohio State shut Indiana down, held them to like 156 yards or something, 150. They gave up 70 on the first drive of the game. So I mean, it doesn't mean that you're doomed if you give up an early scoring drive, but I do think that is an area where they need to improve is being better on those early downs at forcing punts, getting turnovers to where your offense can go spark you to a lead. I think that's a big part of if they can improve a little bit there, then this defense is going to really roll and play champion. Because again, what's the standard? It's not being one of the better defenses in the country, but are you playing championship football? Is this going to be good enough to win a championship? Those things were good enough to beat Florida State and Virginia and Army and Navy and Stanford, Georgia Tech even. But is that going to be good enough to beat Indiana, to beat Georgia, to beat Penn State, Oregon, Texas, Ohio State, Tennessee? That's a different level. And that's an area where I think this defense can and must get better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think along with all the things that you had just listed off, The one that I would add would be in the games where Notre Dame's defense came out and was the best in the first quarter, it's the games that they dictated the pace. It was the games that they decided, hey, no matter what you really do, like you're not going to be able to move the ball on us. And now, again, might be a little bit unrealistic in the playoffs when you are facing higher caliber offenses than the Stanfords of the world, than the Virginias of the world. I'm very well aware of that fact. But it almost feels sometimes like Notre Dame's defense kind of goes out there on the first drive to just kind of see what the offense is going to do. And then when they get a little taste of it, they're like, okay, that's done now. And then they just don't do anything for 3 additional quarters.
I can live with, Trevor,
Sure.
because if you come out too aggressive and they've got something for you, then they're throwing a ball over your head and you're giving up a 50-yard touchdown.
Right.
So I'm actually okay with that overall, but do what you did against USC. Force a stop.
Yep.
Right? Like, I don't care if they get to midfield or the 40, as long as you force a stop and don't keep them from scoring.
Yeah.
That's a big key for me.
Sure.
It's not, you better force 3 and outs on your first 3 drives or I'm going to be pissed in the post-game show. No, it's keep them off the board, but also to try your best to make sure that they're not getting so deep that they're pinning you inside the 10, and that's where your offense gets to start their game. And now you're in that place.
Sure.
For the first half of you're constantly backed up and the field is flipped and those type of things. So that's kind of where I mean by that. You just got to keep the points down. Got to keep the points down and let your offense get caught up as well, especially in the first round game where it's like it's been 3 weeks since you played. I don't think they're going to come out rusty, but just in case they do, right, then your defense has got to make sure that they keep them, keep the points down enough until the offense figures it out, and then you're in a good place.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I'm okay with that happening, especially if it doesn't result in points.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it too, I will say, I don't want it to eat up too much clock either. Like that is my, it can't be something to where, if IU receives first, right? Notre Dame defers to the second half and they go on a play that eats up 7 minutes of game clock before Notre Dame's offense is able to take the field for the first time. So I'm okay with that. Yeah. Absolutely. And at the end of the day, if it takes up seven minutes of game clock, but like they don't score, then that's a win, right? Like I'm not going to be too upset about that. It's just, we talk a lot about Notre Dame's rhythm offense and all that thing. So that's more of a preference. But at the end of the day, first quarter's got to be solid for, 4 games. It's got to be solid if Notre Dame wants to make the run we believe that they can. So couldn't agree more.
So Trev, those are areas where Notre Dame needs to step up and play better, and areas where they need to continue playing great football here down the stretch. I'm going to add one more. They have tackled a lot better in the second half of the year than they did the first half of the season. That's got to continue. Now, you could say, well, they haven't played as good at teams in the second half. I would argue that the teams that they've played in the second half of the year aren't as good as they were in the first half, but the offenses they've played in the second half of the season are better than the offenses they played in the first 6 of the season. Because if you think about the best offenses they played, if you look at the first 5 games, the only really good offense they played in the first 5 games, in my opinion, was Louisville. That's it. Second half of the year, they played better offenses. You played Navy, who's got a really good offense. Army's got a really good offense. USC has a very talented offense. Georgia Tech has a very talented offense. And I think those are the games where I thought you saw their tackling getting a lot better. Now, I thought against USC, there was some out-of-control play at times. You had Don Schuler had a chance to lay a running back out, but he went out of control and low and whiffed. And it was, you got to avoid that stuff. So that's an area where it's like, keep doing what you're doing prior to USC at times. Like you had Gabriel Rubio missed a sack up, or missed a tackle at the line of scrimmage, then ended up turning into a 20-yard run. Riley Mills and Josh Burnham both missed sack opportunities. Like those things didn't get you beat against a USC team that's talented, but also not a playoff team because of a lot of other issues. Teams like Indiana, teams like Georgia, teams like Penn State, teams like Oregon, teams like Ohio State, you miss those opportunities against them, they're going to make you pay for it in a much bigger way than the teams that you beat the last 6 weeks. So tackling has got to be on point in this playoff as well, at the line of scrimmage especially. If you get a chance to stuff a running back at the line, you got to do it. You get a chance to sack the quarterback, you've got to do it. And those are going to be big, big keys to this as well that we didn't dive into enough, but that's a huge part of this success for the defensive play to champion. I feel like all these teams in the playoffs, whoever defenses are the most disciplined and tackle the best, are going to have the best chance at being consistently good week after week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, one thing that they did a really good job of that they did not do a good job of at the start of the year was running backs getting extra yardage, ball carriers getting extra yardage after contact. And they have done a much better job of that in the second half of the season. It's just got to be, I mean, it's super fundamental and it sounds super basic, but it's just 11 hats on the football. You know what I mean? 11 gold helmets need to be rushing into gang tackle. And they've done a really good job of that the second half of the season. I mean, Army's defense had no idea what to do. Army's offense had no idea what to do, man. I mean, it's just whoever turned the corner, there was 3 gold helmets waiting for him. You know, you're up the middle, it gets stuff. Like Kanye Udo did not have a whole lot of fun against Notre Dame. You know, so it's got to be a lot of that because you look at some of the running backs you're going to face. I mean, you know, Justice Ellison and oh gosh, the other kid's name is escaping me.
Tyson Lawton.
Yep, Tyson Lawton. They're good running backs. They run really hard. And if you come in out of control and you come in too high and you don't try to gang tackle, like they will break tackles. That like no matter what. So and obviously we don't.
Keyshawn Williams is that way, and Miles Price is that way, or no, Miles Cross is the slot guy, right? It's Miles Price and Miles Cross are their 2 starting field receivers.
Yep.
And it's that way too in the second round. I mean, you know, Georgia's got guys, Nate Frazier, Travis Etienne, or Trevor. Trevor Etienne. Those are guys that if you don't tackle well, as Texas showed in the second half of that game, you don't tackle well, they can hurt you.
Oh yeah, Texas's defense wanted nothing to do with Trevor Etienne, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just you got to be able to tackle well as a team. Also tackle well in space. Like it's got to be clean performances. It can't be, you know, shades of Notre Dame teams in the past where they just wanted nothing to do with physical football. Come in under control, tackle well in space, stuff runs when you have the chance. Yeah, 100%.
So, Trev, that's going to do it for that final portion. Actually, that's going to do it for that final portion. We do have our 3 big keys coming up next. That's what we're going to end things on. But before we get to that point, folks, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And, of course, as always, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com.